I'm Paula Eddy Wilcox, and welcome to this episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the leadership journey of our guest and what unique traits bring them to be the leader they are today. Who knows what we're going to discover together, so I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to this episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. And I'm dead excited today because I've got David Charlton, who's with us, sports psychologist extraordinaire. I've known David for a good few years now and just delighted to have him as a guest on my podcast because normally I'm a guest on his and we're always talking about all sorts of different things. So welcome, David.
No, a big thank you for the invite. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. Super. You don't know what you've let yourself in for. Normally I just, have to do one episode for you. You've got to do 3 for us, which is really exciting.
Most definitely. Yeah, bring it on.
Fantastic. Well, for those of you that don't know David is a sports psychologist who helps athletes, coaches and teams of all levels, from the motivated and talented youngster right up to the experienced professional who competes internationally. Typically, his clients are looking to perform more consistently in their chosen sport and deal with the pressures that they face better. David supports them by developing their mental toughness using evidence-based tools from sport and organisational psychology alongside personal insights. As well as working in sport, he also enjoys supporting senior leaders, entrepreneurs and business professionals to deal better with pressures and stresses that they face in their lives and work. So I did read that, David, to introduce you, but I think it's important that I set the scene appropriately because you are all about supporting people with mental toughness.
Yeah, that's right. Mental toughness is most definitely the theme, which obviously links back to my podcast, which you've kindly been on, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, it's I do a lot of work with clients around resilience, as part of the foundation of their leadership, because without paying attention to it, the more and more that you take from this glass inside you, if you think about it like that, the more that you keep taking as life's challenges come your way and the complexities and the workload and everything else that we're sort of pulling on our resilience for, the sort of less and less is in that glass. And at some point, if you don't take time to refill it, you're going to have an empty glass and you're going to reach burnout. And obviously the work that we do in slightly different ways, but with the same end goal, is helping people prevent that burnout and support themselves for, with their resilience for making them the best selves.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And, if you look back over the last couple of years with COVID, the need for mental toughness support and training and resilience support is such a huge thing, because so many people, especially high achievers, have possibly overworked. They've got themselves into bad habits because they're working from home a lot, or they're on laptops more than maybe they ever have been. And as you say, then obviously self-care comes into it massively.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about your leadership journey and how you got to be where you are now, because there's all sorts of things going on, and I'll hand over to you in a second, but just a reminder for the listeners. So today is about David's leadership journey. Then of course we have our second episode with David, which is about his take on game and leadership. And then of course the third episode is all about those real pivotal moments, those real challenges in life where you come through the other side and having discovered something about yourself that you weren't sure or didn't even realize was there before you went into that challenge. So we've got some really exciting chats to have, David. So without further ado, how did you get to be the leader you are today?
Okay, so I'm going to look back at my previous career. So I worked in the travel industry. So yeah, my first role was on the check-in desks at Newcastle Airport. I then
Okay.
progressed to baggage and ticket desks. And when I look back at that particular role, I would say that ego was a big thing. I came across some very egotistical people.
Mm.
If I think about it, I won't mention any names, but there was a famous football manager who I came across a number of times, who often threw his toys out the pram and talked down to us when we were trying to serve his needs.
Mm.
I can remember it was a very prominent local businessman in the northeast of England approached my check-in desk with the "I've got a bomb in my bag" type of attitude, and well, not attitude, but that's exactly what he said. So my role was to tell him, well, I'm sorry, mate, but you're not traveling on the flight anymore.
Mm.
And we had to get the police involved, obviously airport security, the pilot came round, and all the
Wow.
while, do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? There was that type of, that
Mm.
type of wording and approach he was taking. And I went on to work in corporate travel for VIPs. So it was, I'll not mention the organization of the VIPs, but essentially our job was to ensure that they got the best seats, the nice swanky hotels, the upgrades, all this sort of stuff. And I'll never forget, this guy he always had to have seat 1A on the specific flight. And one day, because he would travel week in, week out to his final destination, one
Mm.
day, somebody obviously must have been a bit more senior to him in the airline's eyes, and they give him 1C. Well, he absolutely tore strips off me. And he put a formal complaint into my company, which we had to then put it onto the airline, etc. And yeah, dealt with it. Oh, I could give you another 10 scenarios, I'm sure, but in a nutshell, just egos and like this hierarchy thing, this control thing really was a bugbear, and it's something I'm very much I try to put at arm's length these days.
Yeah, it's so interesting you talk about that, David. And I had no idea you'd had this whole other life in travel, which is fascinating. That's why I love these chats with people, because you just find out so much great stuff about why we show up as who we are today. But yeah, my history, my first sort of 13 and a half years in full-time work, was in the hotel industry. And for a big chunk of that, I was looking after the VIP population at the flagship Hilton Hotel in London. And yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of those egos that come across. So what is it about that then that made you think about your leadership journey?
So yeah, moving on a few more years. So what I'd be towards my late 20s, and I got the role as branch manager in the corporate travel company that I was working for at the time. I was the youngest person in the office, the least experienced, and there was other people in the office who'd gone for the role, didn't get it. And I suppose, yeah, I was at the time, I would say my confidence wasn't at a particularly high level. And I think over about a period of 6 to 7 years, I think I had 4 different managers.
Mm.
Two of them were very, what I would class as Jekyll and Hyde characters. I didn't know what I was going to get from one day to the next. So my confidence would be very up and down. I would internalize different things that they were saying and doing. It certainly didn't help me as a manager. Then I went on to have 2 more managers. One was very much the opposite, who just, there you go, just do your stuff, get on with it. And I suppose I didn't have real direction there. So that had me sort of questioning myself.
Mm.
And then I would say the final manager was if there is a so-called perfect manager, this was the guy who gave me direction, was what I would class as quite empathetic. He boosted me up, gave me confidence. I couldn't fault him with the way things worked. So yeah, I suppose from that, because I internalized things as a manager, I think as a senior person, one thing I've taken from it is like, how can I actually give my managers confidence, but then as a manager, how can I give my staff and my employees confidence? That is like one of the big themes that sort of shines in my work, and obviously that comes very different to each individual, but I think it's very, very important.
Yeah, yeah, that is so interesting what you're sharing there in terms of how those differences in the leaders that you've experienced, especially in the early years, have impacted the way that you now choose to show up as a leader in your world, for your team, for your employees now. So yeah, what would you say then are those attributes that you covet as part of how you're choosing to show up for your team now? And perhaps conversely, you could share afterwards the things that you absolutely don't want to covet as part of that.
So I think well, communication's what a big one there, and trying to have honest communication and clear communication without being hugely critical. So it's getting that balance right. That's certainly one thing. Empathy is such a big one, and understanding, recognizing. If we go back to values, recognizing that people work for different reasons, and if I look back to my younger, inexperienced days, I didn't really get that. I was always the hardworking, not too worried about putting extra hours in, and I didn't really understand that some people just rocked up because it was money in the bank, essentially. They didn't enjoy what they did, but to them it was you get clock watchers, don't you? The people who go in at 9 o'clock and they leave at 5. And actually, I think what I recognize now is those people are still quite important. Well, not quite, they are important. Just having a blend of different characters in your team is essential.
Yeah, I always used to think of those, or still do in my teams, that they're the ones that are the sort of the solid that you can rely on, that are, they're going to show up every day at 9 o'clock or whatever it is, and that yes, they're going to go home at 5, but you're going to get what you get within those hours, and that's that constant, if you like, for the team. You've then got the other characters varying, in between, where you've got some that are less capable, less willing, whatever that might be, and then you've got the others that will go that extra mile, and so on. So you're absolutely right where you use the term balance there across that team, and you need all of those different characters. I'd argue that perhaps you don't need the ones that are less productive and less committed, but however, that's your opportunity to support them to see if they can come up to speed with the rest of the team. If not, you've got a different situation on your hands, of course.
Yeah, and I suppose try and understand exactly why it is that they're doing what they're doing, and try and find out what motivates them the best you possibly can. Dangle some carrots in some ways can really help that type of person.
Yeah, absolutely. And the communications that you talked about and the empathy piece, I've probably said this before on one of my previous podcasts, but I love the Brené Brown, I think it's like 3.5-minute clip on YouTube, of empathy versus sympathy, and how empathy works. And I think a lot of people, aren't always clear on what that means and how that might translate in the workplace, for example. So if you haven't watched that, I recommend that. It's a real good 3.5 minutes or whatever it is. It's not very long, because it just helps show truly what empathy means. And what we're not saying is that every single time you see somebody on your team that you're, oh, they're there and I know how you feel, and all of that stuff. It's very subtle. It can be really subtle, and sometimes it doesn't even require any words. It's how you choose to show up and support those members of your team. And something else you said in there, David, as well, about those that sort of show up, do what's needed, and go. I don't know if you've heard, that term quiet quitting that's come around since the COVID pandemic, and how people are choosing to stay in the job they're in, but do the barest minimum because they've just had enough of whatever it is that's not agreeing with them anymore, rather than voting with their feet and finding another job. So have you come across anything to do with that?
I have, sadly. I
Okay.
can remember at the time it was a big bugbear for me, where there was a couple of people in particular would moan and moan about their job, and I was always Mr. Positivity at the time.
Yeah.
I'm always like, you can find a way, type attitude. I always worked my way up the ranks, and I couldn't really, I just didn't get them whatsoever. Why be so doom and gloom? Why be so negative? Like, if you're not happy, actually do something about it. That was always my take on it. But I would say now I have mellowed, and I am more understanding of that type of person. It's probably fear at the end of the day which holds them back from making changes. But again, you really, I suppose it's a psychologist talking here now, not a manager. Essentially, it's trying to get to the bottom of why that is the case, why they think that way, and then see if you can help them and change that. Although obviously it's very difficult, because you, in a generally in a workplace, in a managerial role, there's only going to be so many opportunities for like personal development, and to untangle that type of behavior, it can take an awful lot of time. But I suppose if you work in a workplace where there's the opportunity for coaching for a period of time, then that may well entangle that mess.
Yeah. It's about creating that opportunity to have a positive impact on somebody who is struggling or disenfranchised with the role for whatever reason, getting to the bottom of it, as you say. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's other things, pressures outside of work, for example, that we're unaware of unless they share that with us. And of course, that's their choice. But there's all sorts of things, obviously, but it's just taking that time, creating that opportunity for that conversation to see if you can help. But then sometimes, you know what, David, it's okay to say, is this job right for you? Is this the right job for you? We don't want to force you to be here if you don't want to be here. And I know we often think about, oh no, the whole recruitment process, that's going to leave me with a gap on the workload. And, we always focus on the negative rather than focusing on helping the person and turning it around into a positive. Because if you both decide this isn't the right job for you, they're going to feel like a weight's been lifted. They're going to work their notice probably to the best of their ability, given that you've invested time to see how they're doing. Gives you a chance to get somebody new in, and more often than not, it ends in a positive way. And who knows, you might get the best person ever that comes in to replace them.
Yeah, and I suppose what you're doing, or what you're talking about there, is essentially, rather than making, say, personal development plans a simple tick box exercise, it is actually paying an interest, as you say, in the individual, and making them feel respected, feel valued.
Yeah.
And yeah, as a result, going back to the confidence piece, that they are going to feel more confident in themselves, at least for a period of time.
You're absolutely right. And, goodness knows, I'm sure you've experienced this. I know I certainly have, where you're in a personal development discussion and it is a tick box exercise. It is painful.
Yeah, I can remember, going back to the travel industry again, there was one company I worked for, and we used to have a once a month meeting, which was a personal development meeting. And the manager really made it really clear that she didn't really want to be there. And it was always the same questions every time. There was no personal element to it. That was a complete tick box. And yeah, it was just a complete and utter waste of my time, which I didn't need. And everybody else.
And it contributes towards that demotivation, doesn't it? And you mentioned the word feeling valued earlier. It makes you feel less valued or not valued at all, because they're just not interested. Now, obviously, there's the view that nobody takes an interest in your personal development more than you do. That's, of course, true. But as a leader of my team, I am interested in my team and what they're capable of. I'm interested in helping unlock those strengths that they weren't even aware of themselves, because who knows what's possible? And it's that art of the possible that interests me, and I get curious about. Okay, we're operating at this level here right now, and I'm just sort of pointing at the bottom of my chin for those that are listening. But what we're aiming for is above my head. If I'm able to help them unlock all this untapped potential.
Yeah, and thinking about like my work now, well, now when I've been working with managers and execs, so many of them are just so wrapped up in their own roles and the processes, the day to day, that actually, yeah, the sort of coaching side to it, if you like, and they don't even think about whatsoever. Just simple things like actually being in the kitchen or the canteen for 2 minutes and having a little bit of small talk with your staff, finding out what's going on in their day and their world. It can be vitally important, but to some people who are just do and see that as wasted time, then they're not going to do that. So yeah, it's so important.
Yeah, and especially now that so many teams, a team that I work with in particular, we're all virtual. So we have to work really hard to make sure we're making those coffee connections that we don't get to physically meet in the kitchen. But can we drop a message and say, I know you weren't feeling great yesterday, you're feeling better today, or I'm just in the middle of something, I could use a quick bounce of an idea. Have you got 2 minutes? Those sorts of things. It takes effort, but boy, is it worth it, because we've got that going really well in the team. And it gives a really positive vibe, and everyone feels very supportive and included as a result.
So how would that work then in practice? Would it be a case of you would just send a message to someone via an email, or do you have like a WhatsApp group set up or anything like that?
Yes, so we're all connected on Teams. So we're able to send a quick instant message, if you like, on Teams. You can see the status as to whether they're busy in a meeting, or you can put do not disturb if you're in the middle of presenting something, or it shows if you're away, or it shows if you're green and available. So that really helps as well. Or if you see they're red, not available and busy, you can just say, can you ping me when you're available so I can have a quick chat? So it takes effort, and we've also set up special group for our coach mentors in our team, to enable them to share ideas, share issues that they're having, others may have faced and have a solution. If they're stuck on a process or whatever, they're able to share all of that with each other as well. And it's a lovely place because they all share, morning, how are you doing? All that kind of stuff that you'd have if you were physically walking into the office. But because we're not physically together, we have to create that in another way. So as I say, it takes effort, but boy, is it worth it when you get it going in a way that we've managed to do.
Yeah, I know some organizations who, like, on a lunchtime, they'll have a half an hour slot where maybe once or twice a week where the staff will sign in there. So essentially they'll be sat at their laptops having their soup or their sandwiches or whatever it is and just having a social.
Yeah.
In some ways, I suppose when I look back at that, I would imagine some staff will be quite resentful about that because it's their lunch break, and really they probably want a break from the screen as well. So there's an argument to say, actually, if organizations are going to value their staff, then maybe having a coffee break 10 minutes in the morning or an afternoon on a regular basis, it would probably be looked at it would probably be looked down to as in like a complete waste of time. In some ways, people could be more productive doing something else, but actually long term for the culture and the team morale and everything, it would probably be a very, very helpful thing.
Yeah, I think excuse me, it's important that you're not making these things mandatory. By that I mean, that people have that element of choice. There'll be a reason that you miss it because you're in a meeting. That's fine, but it's about creating the opportunity, isn't it, and allowing people to choose if they want to show up for that. You'll get the ones that absolutely love it, and the ones that don't. They're not that interested, and that's okay.
Yeah. I suppose, if you were in that leadership role, you would have to sell the benefits essentially of like doing something like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So tell me a little bit about the transition then from the travel industry into sports psychology, just to finish off today's episode in your leadership journey.
Oh, that was going to be my next part.
Oh, is it? Okay. All right, I'll hold that thought then. I'll hold that thought. But one thing that I forgot that I asked you about, but we didn't come back to. So you shared that you covered the confidence, the communication, and the empathy in leaders. The bit that we didn't talk about were the things that we don't covet in a leader. So what is it over the years that you've seen that you're like, that's not how I want to show up to my team?
I think it goes down to control, which is something we've been talking about really in the last part. Is essentially is trying to empower people, spend time with them so that they learn specific skills. I suppose if I look back at my time when I was managing when I was younger, I didn't have the awareness that I do now, and I wouldn't have been a very good delegator. In all honesty, I think it's important as a leader, as a manager, to be able to try and delegate, to pass on tasks on a regular basis. But I suppose for myself, it was my inner critic. I think I wanted to be that perfect person in some ways who could do everything, and you just can't do that. Wise after the event.
Yeah, you raise a very good point there, David, and I think there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different sort of profiling tools out there that will tell you the different strengths in the team or the different preferences. And we have differences in a team for a reason. It makes sure that you've got those you've got somebody over there that's really good and can handle the comms for the team. You've got somebody over there that's really great and can analyze the data for the team. You've got somebody over here that's really great and does something else, in order to bring together that whole. And that goes back to the balance piece that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, no, without doubt. And that is something, again, which I'm going to like bring into part 2 or part 3, is how helpful the like psychometrics and profiling tools are, to say the least.
Oh, I'm excited about that.
I'll leave that hanging.
Fantastic. Well, look, it's been so great to talk to you today. Thank you so much for telling us about your sort of earlier experiences of leadership. I can't wait to discover a bit more about the sports psychology piece and how you got into that. So that, if nothing else, that's going to encourage everybody to have a listen to the next 2 episodes. So for now, today, thank you so much, David. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, no, big thank you, Paula.
Welcome. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders. Today, we listen to the leadership journey of our guest and how they got to be where they are today. Now, in the chats, we talked about all sorts of different things, and there are lots of bits and pieces in there that are going to mean something different to each and every one of you. You will all have your own unique takeaways, so I encourage you to do a bit of reflection now and see what this might mean for your leadership moving forwards. I'm Paula Eddy Wilcox, and I look forward to seeing you on Game of Leadership, the podcast for curious leaders, next week. Bye for now.